Good afternoon, everyone. David Dubine from Adapt 2030. Personal message to Bernie Sanders. Bernie, you've lost your relevancy in the climate debate flying private jets. And then when they called you on it to say you used carbon offset credits, $5,000 worth, supplied by the Democratic Party. That's awesome. That's great and everything, but those tons of CO2 that you used for your private jet to run around over the midterm elections, that's still in the atmosphere. The Democratic Party is telling us, oh, it's an extinction level event. There's CO2 greenhouse gas. We need to do everything renewable. It's an extinction level event if we put any more up there. And you're flying around in private jets and trying to lecture the rest of us on how we have to live our lives. Reduce your carbon footprint, eat insects. And that's personally my own opinion. I mean, everything you say from now on about carbon, I'm just going to go, the guy flies a private jet. It's like somebody who's super healthy telling you how to work on the gym, and then they go out and they have a cigarette after they finish and telling you that you need to be healthier. Same exact thing. Same exact thing. You could have made an astounding effect if you'd run by rail and done the whistle-stop tours like Kennedy, Truman, and Eisenhower did. Now myself, I talk about the grand solar minimum 400-year cycle in the sun, that we need to grow our own food because what's happening last year and this year are a great indicator of in the non-availability in the future of what's coming. And I'm really not talking in 2100 like they do all the time in the climate debate. I'm saying now, next year, the year after next. And as we roll into global food shortages by 2028, severe reductions in availability by 2023. I want to show you what I did on my balcony over the last 9 months. I really wanted to wait for the entire year so I could go through the entire spring, winter, fall, and just show you what grew or what didn't grow. But with Bernie coming out, such hypocrisy. I wanted to show you if I'm talking and telling you have to grow your own food, I should be doing it too, should I not? What if I sat on my sofa right there? And I just ate chips and I did nothing. And I said, you need to grow your own food, but not me. What would you think of that? I'm doing what I'm asking you to do so we can compare ideas of what works and what doesn't. I've even used a 6 square foot balcony that was literally off somebody's window edge to try to experiment versus having a longer, I got 2 30-foot balconies in the back here, in a city, to show you it really can be done. And then Bernie, you're telling us we can't consume or do anything because CO2 is such an extinction level gas, and you're running private jets. Ha! Anyway, let's take a look at what I did on the balcony. And also, when we look at the climate, we really need to look back over longer cycles than just this satellite era in the last 150 years to determine what's happening with the climate. Truly, let's go back thousands of years and take a look. Take it back 17,000 years here. And you notice almost all the debates always end around, 5,000, 4,000 years ago in temperature. They might show the 8,000-year cooling event, but they always stop short of showing you the younger Dryas. The reason why is it's very apparent how quickly the temperature can fall and rise on our planet. See, on the right side of the chart, that's 17,000 years ago, and as we come to the left, 15,000, 10,000, 5,000, and the 0 is our present day era. But you notice a couple of times through the climate record how quickly things just skyrocketed in terms of temperature. And what we're squibbling and quabbling about here, 1 degree, a 1.5 degree, the temperatures that were experienced then were, 10, 12, 14 degrees Celsius rises in just a decade. It's really startling what has happened with the Earth's climate in the very recent past. The IPCC and all the climate debate tries to lock you into the last 40 years, the last 150 years. Well, that's really nothing when you're looking at a much larger system of cycles intertwining amongst each other. And even one of my favorites that I'm really into now, the African megalakes are starting to refill in their catchment boundary areas, and this is where the Chinese have terminated the rail lines. Now, I don't think that's coincidental. Now, taking a look at the river basins and the streams, estuaries, etc. on this map, let's bring it into something easier to look at. That blue, that's mega lakes. In the green, that's forest in what is now Northern Africa, the Sahel, driest places on the planet. That full Northern Africa, that is just bone-dry desert. But a little more than 7,000 years ago, lush. So when we look at this and you say, notice where the Chinese rail lines are terminating also. And what do they know about these longer cycles? Because the rains that are starting again across North Africa are beginning to fill some of these smaller basins, not the super largest lakes, don't get me wrong, but some of the smaller basins are beginning to refill. Let me see places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, rivers are running that haven't run in 3,600 years. And if we go to the Tarim Basin over in China, we start to see the same thing. If you're coming off of Qinghai down that basin there into the Tarim desert area, more rainfall. Now, you can't tell me in 3 areas across the planet we're starting to see these massive multi-thousand year cycles of rainfall. It's not coincidental. It's a cycle. Just like the grand solar minimum. Take a look at these 400-year cycles in our climate pattern, and we are heading right back into a 400-year cooling event at the bare minimum. I personally feel it's a more heavy cycle, more powerful cycle this time around, but it will be inclusive of one of these 400 years here as well. Forecast looks a little like this. Sun heads into the bottom of the 11-year solar cycle, which is the regular 11-year. But as it tries to climb out of that, it doesn't reach very high in the activity state, and then it drops right back into a low again. And the prolonged lack of sunspot activity, Dr. Wahid Uddin puts the solar activity even lower. And so many forecasters out there are 50 sunspots or less. And here we have everything from 50 to 31, 25. There's some others out there saying it'll be 70, equivalent to what the sunspot cycle was this last solar cycle, 24. There's all projections and ranges in between. I'm tending toward the 50 or less, which is going to bring us back into massive crop losses that were experienced as the magnetosphere weakens and our jet streams go out of flow. Now, one thing you'll start to look for is increasing Arctic sea ice, and that'll be unexplainable. And I just don't know how they're going to switch the masses and say, all right, we told you Arctic sea ice was melting for the last 40 years, but oops, it's actually going to gain for a little while here, but don't worry about that. That's all part of the global warming cycle. And let's keep staying with us on the global warming thing, because ice is going to be a new thing because of the warm. So just, the record snows way down in southeast U.S. and northern Africa. That's part of it too. All this warmth is creating more snow, creating more sea ice. But the crops aren't going to handle this very well. Irregardless of what the IPCC and all the climate mythologists out there have you believe about CO2, crops don't care what our politics are. They're going to stop growing or reduce their yields. They don't care what the country boundaries are. They don't care what the nations are. They don't care what the continents are. They're going to reduce their yields and stop growing in certain latitudes. It's not even about continents anymore. It's about latitudes. 45 degrees north latitude and above, very little will grow as we move forward. It's major grain production for the entire planet. This is where we're going. But the CO2 enthusiasts out there, and the reason I did the introduction talking about Bernie Sanders was, this is a complete climate scandal in itself. He spent $300,000 on private air travel in October to run around the battleground states for the midterm elections. Fine, I understand that. At the very least, Bernie, you could have flown commercial. That would have put me at ease a little bit. But then you purchased $5,000 in carbon offset credits to balance the emissions. But see, that's the thing. The emissions are still in the air. Regardless if you buy a credit to offset it somewhere else around the planet, the carbon that was added, and it ain't coming out. And then the cost to cover the entirety of the tour was from Indiana to Michigan to Wisconsin, Iowa, South Carolina, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and California, and then back to Vermont. And I am 100% sure every one of those states listed on this list has commercial airlines flying to several airports, including the capitals, around those states. But they deemed it necessary to use a private jet service. And they're saying, well, it's not as if we actually own the jet. Nonetheless, the CO2 is running up in the air, causing more warming than yesterday. And that was the whole thing. After they were outed about using the private jet, they came out and they kept saying, well, we bought these carbon offset credits. And see, that's the whole thing. The carbon is still in the air, and the hypocrisy of these global climate warriors coming out to say, you can't do this, you got to stop doing whatever you're doing because it's causing too much CO2, but then at the same time putting an enormous amount of carbon in the air and then say, well, we bought a credit for it, it's cool, don't worry about it, but you got to stop now. And see, in my world, that doesn't work. I refuse that. I do not accept it. Nope, nor should anybody else. Then the reporters came out and said, well, let's see what else they've delved into in private luxury air travel. Now, 2017 wasn't bad. It was only $37,000. But when we look back at 2016 presidential election, $5.2 million in jet services. So how many tons of CO2 was that, making global warming run away even further than it would have if he flew commercial? Now, see, the presidential flight schedule, I can understand. But going for the midterm elections, I think there would have been much more bang for the buck media-wise had a whistle-stop tour been done. You know, it'd be a rare thing these days. Kennedy did it. And I know all those same towns up in the Northeast are all connected by rail. Are you telling me Wisconsin has no rail lines? Are you kidding me? From the Great Lakes, there's no rail lines there that run anywhere else? Bernie, you could have rented a train on your own. You could have gotten something like 4 cars, put it together. Got Truman, Eisenhower. I mean, look at this famous, iconic photo here. Truman on a whistle stop. Then if we can go back even further in time and take a look at Hoover on a whistle stop, I mean, that crowd's larger than some of the politicians today that we even see on the circuits. But let's jump into the modern era here. This is the example. Asian city, scoot down to the end of the rail line there, and you come into the mountain areas. Now, the mountain areas across the city are cheaper than actually living downtown. People find it cumbersome to have to travel 25 or 30 minutes along a rail line to come into the city. But all the older buildings that have balconies are out in that same area in the base of the mountains, lower elevations. Everything new that's in the city has no balcony, it's just glass, and you get a box to live in the city. So I was searching for a place, and I found this. There's 2 of these balconies. The other one comes to a V. And I thought, well, this is great. What can I do here? So I started to stock it out in the beginning with some pots. We put things on the ground. What's the moisture level like? What's the airflow like? What kind of natural rain's being blown in or not? Where's the sunrise and the sunset during the spring, the summer? It's different. Everything on a balcony is incredibly finicky, if you will. I didn't realize how finicky it was going to be until I started actually putting things up there to grow. Started with some sprouts as well. Those did pretty well. Then there's some other areas over on the right where you can lay things in. Did some sweet potatoes later on. But the ultimate thing was to then, with the balcony, have this on the wall where you get some grow space on the vertical sections as well. So just trying to couple everything together and experiment. And then even on a little tiny thing, this thing's about 6 square foot, this balcony here. It's not even a balcony, it's just an area outside the window. If you want to hang something of clothes to dry, basically you can. Local company manufacturing these vertical stack units. You can put 2 of these next to each other. We started with 1 in the beginning to see what could grow out of there, and we had results. So you can literally grow in the city. Then as the months were progressing through the spring, it was more about trying with the sprouts and, you know, moving into different size containers because the smaller containers dried out too quickly. It was very difficult to keep those hydrated, and it was either too wet or it was too dry, and things just didn't grow right. Getting the moisture right with the sprouts is one thing. Some days the wind is great, other days it's not. And how to arrange everything so there's balance of the light out there. So in the morning or in the evening, the plants can get the correct amount of light, because then, you know, you got to figure out which plants like light or which ones like more shade and try to balance everything. And you notice those at the top left there, those 2 in the pots, those are Moringa oleifera, one of my favorites. These are the seeds after you sprout them out here. But it's all about trying to bring things to seed, because if the seed source dries up eventually, you're going to have to try to get things to go to seed so you have a batch for the next year. Was able to get some onions to go to seed, roses, the different beans. We had a couple different bean varieties, white beans, black beans. Sprouting not only in the trays, but just to see what would happen in the pots themselves. And again, you notice that white cup right there, that was a coffee cup that was recycled and used as just a small starter holder for a plant. So even if you don't have any cash, you can for sure find a used coffee cup to at least put an onion sprout in there, something that a restaurant would throw away anyway, and then you can regrow it. Celery, onions, garlic, any of these types of things. Just throw them back in the dirt, they'll regrow again. And then it was about the different types of sprouts, and it was which beans we could find at the local market, and how they would grow, and how much soil is really needed. How long can you grow that before the roots start to, as you see just at the bottom, they're starting to turn a tinge different color. And once you cut those, what's going to come back after the first cut? If you leave that out there, there's going to be more growing that are tucked in or hidden within there. And how much effort is that to get the second cut out versus the effort to go and water it and keep it in the right place and give space for it, etc. Peas and the beans, and it was just a really great learning experience moving through to see what grew in which temperatures and which seasons things grew better than others. So I was really a fan of trying to do some of these more delicate type of sprouts, the amaranth and also the chia seeds, because the amaranth I'm really interested in growing as a grain crop and trying to get some grain out of it. Very healthy, very edible, nutritious. Just trying, see what works. Originally it was some burlap and some coconut coir sheets that were around. That grew out pretty well, but then couldn't control the moisture content. A lot of mold in there, even with a fan. Ended up putting it outside, and we tried it without being on the sprouting tray to then take that same burlap and put it on dirt and see what would happen. Would the roots go through quicker, and what would happen with that? And then ended up just having to put them in dirt themselves to try to sprout it out. Try to grow in everything, literally. Egg carton, that's 8 little extra cups there that you can put some soil in, and you can see how well these amaranth sprouts did in there. And then I used those as plugs, but I just took them out and then stuck them in a larger pot and used it kind of as a grow plug itself as a starter. So, there's so many options, and if space is limited, you're going to have to think outside the box as to how to try to start to grow something. And again, this paper towel here with some chia seeds, a few came up, walk away for 4 or 5 hours, boom, too dry, they died off. So then it was the same thing. It came out, I had to start sprouting these to get in the proper amount of moisture. Couldn't use a watering can, had to use a spray bottle because too much water was going in and the roots would get... There's just so many things to learn trying to do an urban garden setting. When I originally started, I was thinking about, all right, well, how can I moisturize? And now it's morphed into trying to get an automated drip system in there, a wicking system in to take it to the next step so everything can be auto-watered on a timer. And also just some other ideas for how to deliver moisture to the plants or the seedlings. And as you progress into this, it's a never-ending thing. It's not you just learn this today and you're done. There's always the next million, billion things that are in front. Add to the set of understanding and knowledge. Another thing, we got these grubs in the past inside late summer. For some reason, all these grubs come in and ate almost all the roots out of a lot of the lettuces and the different leafy vegetables that we had. We lost almost everything due to these grubs, and they literally got in everything. And then we had spider mites out on some of the flowers, and those started to spread in. Just a simple alcohol and water mixture to take care of this. Birds coming in to try to nest and dig out things. Insects eating the leaves themselves. It's not just because you're on a balcony that you're somehow immune from all these flying predators out there too for your plants. You're in the natural ecosystem here. You got butterflies out there. In the springtime, it's the white butterflies, and they leave the eggs, and the green caterpillars come up. Continuous care to see what has jumped on your plants overnight as you wake up. It's a good way to have a cup of coffee in the morning, truly. Tea, coffee, matcha, yerba mate, whatever you're into. The whole thing is about seeds too, proper storage of the seeds. This is my seed collection that we have here just for sprouting and planting on that little garden. So it's about wandering out to the local markets just to see what they have. Bring it home. If you can't sprout it, well, then that means it's been processed in a certain way. Well, cook it. And then if it wasn't sprouting outside, I was trying to sprout some things inside. Wheatgrass outside, wheatgrass inside. Where can you find the seed supplier in town? That was one of my things. I went around and found a seed supplier. They were incredibly surprised that I could sprout that. They were growing for farmers. They didn't know there were people like myself that I could sprout this. I brought the jar back, like, whoa, where did that come from? Also, beans, you got to take care with the beans. And just the more you work with this stuff, the better you're going to get at it. You'll know what's going to work for your local climate, because what's here in the subtropical area probably not going to work if you're somewhere up in Canada, and vice versa. Now, those two knowledge sets can definitely be shared, but those same plants, and they're just not going to overlap into the same areas, for sure not. And even when you got a pumpkin, it's something so simple like this. Got a pumpkin, wash the seeds. Sprinkle them with salt, put them in the oven. Bring them out, throw some pepper on it. That's kind of what it's all about. Try not to waste any food. Whatever you think is going to be waste, look to see, can it be replanted, repurposed, reprepared for something that you can eat. 2 salads like this per week out of that balcony garden now. And the vertical garden that you saw, the white one, that produces this types of lettuce here. We got the romaine and the rocket. And then the sprouts, these are the chia sprouts along with the white bean sprouts. And then in the background there, that's lemongrass that's been dried. I grow my own lemongrass too out there. So once it gets to a certain height, cut it, bring it in, dry it out. So I went back to the States to visit my family over the summer, and I had some garden that my mom wasn't using. And sure enough, I put all this stuff out here, and they were shocked how fast it grew. So when I had this natural space and I had a hose, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be super easy. People are going to trample and kill each other over televisions and fist fights, and you know all that nastiness that happened this year. And it's like that every single year when these shopping holidays come around. Can you imagine what it's going to be like when they're fighting for food to stay alive? Put that in your head for a second. Very few of those people you see in that photo probably have the skills to grow anything. I mean anything. They could be sitting in their house with probably 20, 30 pounds of seed, and they would starve to death, and they didn't even know that they could sprout it within 7 days and still prepare that as food in a soup or something until they get the sprouts going. Solar activity is right in front of us here. It's a very interesting world we are heading into. That's why I spend my time doing this channel, to try to bring you this information about the grand solar minimum so you can get yourself prepared for these changes. You know, not everybody's going to get prepared, that is for sure. Not even close to 10% will be ready for this event. You're going to be on your own. Governments won't be able to help you. They're going to be overwhelmed with those other 90% of that crowd that I showed you in the store that they're going to have to take care of somehow. So the better off you are preparing and understanding how to take care of yourself at the basic level, you'll be able to ride this out no problem. You'll adapt to growing the food. Everybody will adapt in the future, and that's why I call my channel Adapt 2030. Because every one of us listening and everybody alive right now will have to adapt their lifestyle so greatly that it will shake your foundation of what reality is by the time this event is even close to culminating. This forecast right here takes us back 400 years in cooling. Like these events you're seeing right now that are so unprecedented really aren't. They just haven't been seen in 400 years. We just don't have the records for these events 400 years ago, or they would be matching today. We're already smashing through the 1880s, 1850s records. So the next couple of years, we're going to be breaking through everything that's ever been kept. There's some areas in Europe that have 300-year temperature records. Germany, Denmark, and the UK. And I tell you what, all 3 of those countries have broken their 300-year cold records this year. In 2018, in the spring. That's when those records were broken. Not for the winter, not for the summer. In the spring, cold broke the 300-year records in all 3 countries. Now that should send a signal right there that we're getting right back into repeating a cycle. But somehow it just misses. It just still CO2. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. If you like this type of information, Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, 30 minutes at a time you can take on the go with you.